Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to another Leadership Greater Washington Frontline Conversation. I am thrilled today because we have one of my favorite people in the world, Jennifer Lockwood-Shabat, here to talk with us. She's a classmate of mine from the class of 2015, and she is a superstar. She runs the Washington Area Women's Foundation. And Jennifer, I remember during our class year, you actually missed half a day because that was your big breakout of your big speech to the foundation and to hundreds of people. So how are you? How's it been going? How's the foundation doing?
Hi, Doug. It's good to see you, and it's good to be here with everyone. And actually, I have to correct you, it was 1,000 people, not 100 people.
Oh, sorry.
No,
I said hundreds. I said hundreds.
No, hundreds. That's good. It's good.
Thousands good.
So I know you asked this question of everyone to start out, and I think most people have said, it's such a hard question to answer, and it really is. This is a hard one for me. I've had, I think you know that my brother passed away very suddenly and unexpectedly at the beginning of July, and that was followed fairly quickly by my aunt, and then my mother's best friend, who is a woman that I've referred to Grammy as my entire life, and so the last 3 months have personally been full of just really deep and profound loss. And so I'm taking things one day at a time. I'm trying to manage my own grieving process at the same time that I'm supporting my mom and my niece and nephew who've lost their dad, and my 2 daughters who are grieving, and sort of how we all move through that, and just kind of trying to give myself a little bit of grace in balancing that. And of course, holding the professional piece at the same time, where we're all collectively grieving, what's happened with COVID-19, the racial injustice that we're seeing on a daily basis, the very fragile state of our democracy. And so for me, it's just been an added challenge is how do I balance what I'm feeling and experiencing personally with what also is happening in the world and what I'm experiencing at a professional level. So it's been a hard 3 months and 6 months, of course, with COVID, and just really trying to take it one day at a time. But I'm super grateful to be here, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful to be healthy. I'm grateful my family is healthy. I'm grateful I have just the most supportive husband in the entire world. And if anything that these last few months have showed me, it's that I am surrounded by a whole community of people who are just incredibly loving and caring and generous, and they have lifted me in ways that I didn't know I necessarily needed it. And so I'm super grateful for that. So thank you for asking.
Jennifer, no, I'm so sorry to hear all that. My heart goes out to you and your family. And
thank you.
Talk a little bit about this community that has supported you in times of COVID, where there's social distancing, people aren't allowed to do that. How did that happen? How did people reach out to you? How did you feel that support?
Yeah, I think, everyone has moved to remote, right? Everybody is working remotely from their homes in various ways. And so I would just say a lot of it has been virtual interactions. There's a lot of quarantinis that have happened, right? Drinks over Zoom, which has been wonderful to connect with people, and just reaching out via text and letting folks know that they're there and supportive. Beth Johnson and Rachel Kwanowitz organized a flower train for me, which was really wonderful. My mom and I got flowers once a week for, over 2 months, which was just really a lovely, beautiful.
That's lovely. That's very nice.
Yeah, it was really, really lovely. My mom's a huge gardener, and so flowers are very, very near and dear to our hearts. And so it was a beautiful, beautiful gesture. And I just think, through the LGW networks, through the Women's Foundation. The Women's Foundation is a very special place. Our board members, our former board members, we're really like family. And so there's a constant connectivity and checking in and reaching out and sort of making sure that everyone is okay, both me personally and then also the staff of the Women's Foundation.
A very tough time. I'm very sorry.
Thank you.
So as you're going through that, you've got, as you said, professionally, run the Women's Foundation, still make that work for everyone. What are some of the things you did to pivot after COVID hit?
Yeah, so like everyone else, and we immediately switched to working remotely starting March 13th. And my first priority really was ensuring that the staff were taken care of. We're a small team, 8 of us total. Half of the staff have children under the age of 5. And so, really recognizing the caregiving duties that were going to be placed upon them and sheltering in place and having children at home with them. And then also understanding the mental health needs that everybody on staff was going to need some space and grace and some time to take care of themselves. And so we moved quickly to work from home. We moved quickly to make sure people were supported and had the technology, et cetera, that they needed to do their jobs, but also really ensuring that we could provide the utmost flexibility to staff as they balance both the needs that they had for themselves and their families and what they needed to do to take care of themselves, with also, the work component of it as well. And so that was kind of our first priority as we moved into COVID. The second thing you mentioned early, our annual luncheon. We do that every fall. It's a
huge event. It's a great event.
Yeah, it's 1,000 people. It's our largest fundraiser and our biggest moment to really show the visibility of the work and what's happening with women and girls in the community. And so we had that scheduled initially for September 22nd. We decided very early on in March that we would cancel the luncheon, that there was no way we'd be able to do an in-person event of that size in the fall. And then we really took some time to understand what was happening in our community with women and girls before we pivoted to launch the Stand Together Fund. So we participated. I know you had Tonya Wellens on to talk about what the Greater Washington Community Foundation has done. They launched an immediate emergency response fund. We participated in that. Staff served on all the working groups to help review applications and make decisions about where emergency response funding was going. We really took the time to listen to community. So talking to organizations about what they were seeing on the front lines, what was happening, how they were being impacted, how women and girls were being impacted. And then we also did something that was maybe slightly different from us than in the past, in that we really reached out to our philanthropic colleagues to say, who didn't you fund, right? Who didn't make it through that review process? And we started some of our thinking around how we established the Stand Together Fund with really trying to understand where are there some gaps in our community, right? Recognizing that the philanthropic sector really stepped up in an incredibly generous and important way, but also knowing that not everybody can be all things to all people, right? And so the Women's Foundation, our expertise is really around gender, racial, and economic justice, and that's what we bring to the table. And so as we looked around at emergency response, we really understood what was happening in our community. We saw a couple places where there were some gaps. The first one was really around smaller organizations. So organizations that have budgets under $1 million weren't necessarily making it through all of the emergency response funding efforts. Those organizations tend to be led by people of color and predominantly women of color. And we know that those organizations have been under-resourced historically, right? It's not just about what's happening in this moment in COVID, but it's really going back. We also began to understand there were a couple of issue areas that disproportionately impact women and girls of color that we felt really needed to be highlighted and showcased. And so that is around survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence. I know you had Kube on to talk about the work at DASH, and then also the stability of our frontline care workers. And for us, as we think about frontline care workers, we were really thinking about child care providers, early educators, in-home health aides, right? These are positions that are predominantly women of color who are working those positions. They are low-wage jobs. And so their financial stability to really carry on in this moment of COVID was very much in jeopardy. So we launched the Stand Together Fund in April, and it is really designed, we've made a commitment to focus in on the smaller organizations, budgets less than $1 million. We've made a commitment to really prioritizing women of color leaders in our community. And we've prioritized survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence, as well as frontline care workers.
So we had Kubi on, as you said, from Dash earlier to talk about domestic violence. What were the things that led you to focus on that as part of your Stand Together Fund?
Yeah, so she did an amazing job of talking about what is happening in the district and region wide around survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence. And I think there's been a lot in both local and national media around the increases that we are seeing domestic violence and the challenges that providers have in providing services, particularly when we are sheltering in place. It's hard to do a telehealth visit if your abuser is in the room next to you, right? So how do you provide services? Many women not necessarily speaking up or reaching out and seeking services because they didn't feel that there was a safe space to do that. The other thing that was really important to us is we've had such a strong focus on racial equity and racial justice, and really we looked at organizations that are providing culturally specific services to a range of population across the region. So for example, we funded the Asian Pacific Islander Domestic Violence Resource Center. We funded the Safe Sister Circle. We funded an organization called Deaf Dawn, which I'm particularly excited that we had the opportunity to fund this very small organization that's doing incredible work providing services to the deaf community. And so we really targeted our support at some of the smaller organizations led by women of color and really tried to ensure that they were culturally specific support to survivors of domestic abuse.
So COVID hit, you went to work from home, you started the Stand Together Fund, you started reaching out to people that needed help during COVID. And then we had all this righteous unrest. We're still having demonstrations across the world, particularly after the murder of George Floyd. You pivoted the Women's Foundation to a racial equity focus a couple of years ago. So what are your thoughts on that? How are you reacting now to all this unrest and the clear evidence of systemic racism in the country?
Yeah. So for the Women's Foundation, and I'll say for me personally, as a white woman leading this organization and this work, our journey really started quite some time ago. I had the experience back in 2014. I happened to be in New York City when the news came down that the grand jury failed to indict on the Eric Garner case. I was there as part of a fellowship for the Ford Foundation. And so it was a small cohort of women, predominantly women of color. And I will say the experience that night of when the failure to indict came down, we left our hotel and we're kind of walking through the city. It happened to be the same night that the Christmas tree was being lit at Rockefeller Center. And so we were kind of making our way there. And as we approached, there was just a very clear line of demarcation, right? If you went to the right, you enter Rockefeller Center where the celebration was happening and the tree was being lit. And it was just a very different experience and atmosphere. And if you went to the left on the other side of the road, that is where all of the protesters were coming together. And so we really spent our time walking in amongst the protesters and talking and really understanding. And it was, for me, it was a very personally profound experience. And coming back here to DC, really thinking about what is our role as a women's foundation, knowing that our work, when we talk about women and girls in poverty or women and girls who experience economic vulnerability, we are, when you look at the data, we are talking about women and girls of color. And we weren't necessarily naming that intentionally in our work. We weren't being really clear that we were talking about Black and Brown and Latinx women. And so We started our own journey in October of 2016. I did make a speech at our annual luncheon, really firmly committing the organization to racial equity. And that was after a process with our board of really listening and learning and educating ourselves about what the issues are, the systemic inequalities that are happening in our community, and how we needed to show up as a very different organization, and we needed to educate ourselves and make some changes, which we've worked really hard to do. So I feel in this moment of time with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and sadly the list of names goes on and on and on, it wasn't an add-on to our work. We were already doing the work, and we were already positioned to say, this is what this work means for women and girls of color. And so when you talk about racism, when you talk about structural racism, when you talk about inequities, we are focused very squarely on women and girls of color. We pivoted quickly. The Stand Together Fund, as I noted, we've made a strong commitment to investing in women and girls of color and their leadership and the power that they already hold within our community. We continue to educate ourselves as an organization. I will say we have Mercy, who's our communications manager, has put together just an incredible list of anti-racism resources that we are updating on a weekly basis and sharing with our community. And I've been doing a lot of work personally as a white woman. How do I do better? How do I learn more? How do I really work with many of my white friends and colleagues? Because I think at the end of the day, the white people need to step up. We have to do the work. We cannot rely on our Black and brown friends and colleagues to do the work for us or to answer our questions, to point us in the right direction. And I've really been working hard on that. And I strongly encourage other white folks to do the same thing. You know, it's an easy place to start. You can read an article, you can listen to a podcast, you can commit to do one thing different. I'm happy to engage in conversations with any of my colleagues and friends about my own personal journey and sort of how that's led to a transformation of the Women's Foundation as well. So I don't know if that totally answered your question, Doug, but.
I was at the lunch where you gave that speech. It was tremendous, and it got a tremendous response, I think, from the 1,000 people in the audience. So congratulations to you.
It's a journey. I mean, it's a journey that will be lifelong, I think, for all of us, and particularly for our white colleagues needing to step up and step into it as well.
And those are very difficult conversations to have. I was on a Zoom call recently with several friends of mine. They were, complaining about the president, whatever. But then a couple of them live in New York. Then they started complaining about the mayor of New York moving homeless people from, downtown up to their neighborhood on the Upper West Side in a hotel. And it was just striking how those people don't belong here. How dare they? They're all drug addicts and sex offenders and whatever. It just struck me that weren't you the one sort of talking about Trump and immigration and how you can't treat people that way, and all of a sudden you're doing the same thing. It's a very difficult conversation, I think, to have with people about that.
I think it is. And I think oftentimes we're afraid to have those conversations, right? We're afraid we're going to say the wrong thing. We're going to do the wrong thing, make a mistake, and we will, right? We don't have the answers. It's not perfect. I know that I have made mistakes. I know that there are times when I've probably said or done the wrong thing. But if we let our fear hold us back from engaging in these conversations, we're never going to get anywhere. And I think, for me personally, I've committed to learning, right? If I've made a mistake or I've said or done the wrong thing, being very open to the feedback about that, and then taking that and translating that into being better and doing better, right? And so I think our fear holding us back, and not wanting to upset the apple cart, right? You're at your Thanksgiving dinner, or it's your neighbor right beside you and they pick up your kids after school kind of thing, right? And so there's a sort of sense of not wanting to engage in a conversation that might upset sort of the normal order, if you will, but then that's not working, right? It's not working for us. And we're not going to get to another place. We're not going to get to liberation for Black and Brown people, and therefore all people, unless we're engaging in these conversations. And sometimes the hardest step is just that very first conversation, and thinking or figuring out the way in which to ask the question. Why is it that they are concerned about a particular population moving into their home, right? Like, what is that all about? And kind of probing a little bit and trying to do it from a much more personal connection.
The sad thing is they won. The mayor reversed himself, pulled 300 people out of that area and put them back where they were before. So anyway, I love that you mentioned the Thanksgiving dinner conversation. My wife is describing the presidential debate that we just saw as a typical family Thanksgiving dinner. Everybody's just shouting over everybody else.
It was something.
So how are you encouraged? How's the progress that you're seeing? One thing that has frustrated me is 5 years ago, we did a conversation, after Ferguson, we did a Leadership Greater Washington conversation on police community relations, Howard John Wesley and a few other people. And here we are 5 years later, I'm talking to Howard John on one of these conversations, and it's the same thing. It's the same thing over and over again. And I went on a civil rights learning journey in the South with the Washington Associated Grantmakers, and what struck me throughout it was, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And what we were witnessing in this civil rights journey was the struggle for voting rights, mainly. I mean, it was deeper than that, of course, in terms of the struggle for humanity, but just the putting the thumb down or the foot on your neck in terms of we're not going to let you vote. And that's what we're dealing with today. We're still dealing with people disenfranchising others for votes because they're afraid of what their vote's going to do. So, so how do you, in some ways it's very depressing, it's very discouraging, but I do keep coming back to something Mother Teresa said, where people say, well, you're helping these people who are dying in the streets, but you help one and you turn around, there's 10 more in the street. You're not being successful. What's the point? And she basically said, well, I'm not being called to be successful. I'm being called to be faithful. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to just keep, as you said, keep plugging away, keep having these difficult conversations. And I pray to God that we will see progress, that this will be a real change, as opposed to just sort of lip service that we've seen in the past. So that's my sermon for the day. And anyway, I'll turn it over to you, Jennifer. How do you feel about all
I totally understand everything that you said, and I think especially when we see breaking news every 2 seconds of another injustice that's happening across this country, it is hard, I think, sometimes to see where there are hope and bright spots, but I do see them, and I'm really holding on to them. And I'll maybe start a little bit with just from a personal perspective with my own daughters who, Doug, they're 21 and 17. So I have a senior in college and a senior in high school.
Katya and Peanut.
Katya and Peanut, yes. Although Peanut will be horrified to know that you called her that. So Katya and Ariana.
Okay.
But yes, no. And so, they live a very privileged lifestyle, right? We live here in Fairfax County. They go to McLean High School. My older daughter goes to University of Colorado Boulder. And I've worked very hard to intentionally educate them about their privilege. And I will say, both girls were home with us during quarantine from March to about August for our older one. And so they were here when many of the protests began across DC. And the way in which both of my girls decided to engage and educate themselves on their own without mom saying to them, hey, you should read this, you should look at this. They really pursued their own learning and began to engage in conversations with their friends in a way that I had never seen before. And it gave me some hope, right? It gave me hope that I think we are in a moment where people are starting to really open their eyes and engage in some learning. And when I say people, I'm really talking more so to white people. Black and brown people have lived this their entire lives, right? But many of us haven't been educated about the true history of our country. And so even my daughters going in and examining the curriculum in their school and understanding, well, wait, we weren't taught that. We didn't learn that. I didn't know this. And so I think that there's beginning to be an awakening and an understanding that there is a history to our country that not everybody knows and understands. And that gives me hope, because I think that as people begin to really truly grapple with the founding of our country, the racist underpinnings of our country, slavery, anti-Black racism, the fact that we're on stolen land, Indigenous people were pushed. I think the more that people begin to learn and begin to understand, and I think understand what it means to live in white dominant culture, what white supremacy is, how we as white people continue to perpetuate that, right? I think as people educate, I'm hopeful that they will make change and that we will see change. I don't think it's going to happen overnight, but I have to be hopeful in order to be able to get up and do the work every day and keep at it.
We do have to hope. As I said, we just have to keep the faith and keep plugging away. And we've seen just in the COVID results how it disproportionately affects people of color. And now we're seeing in California and Texas that the majority of people who are dying from it are Latinx, and it's just decimating some communities in those two states and in other states and neighborhoods.
Yeah, absolutely.
No,
and women and girls of color are really bearing the brunt of this crisis, and we see that on a daily basis. They're shouldering caregiving. They are taking the hardest hits in terms of job loss. They're predominantly already in low wage jobs, immigrant women, undocumented women who could not necessarily take advantage of some of the federal benefits that have come down, right? So women and girls of color are really bearing the brunt of the crisis. And we're seeing that play out in real time every single day across the region.
Something you said made me reconsider something that a decision I made a while ago. So I mentioned this conversation with friends. They were high school friends. And, I tend to keep doing that and sort of tend to keep trying to talk about these issues with them. But I also had a series of Zoom conversations with grade school friends. And I just decided they don't get it. It's a totally different mindset. I was very uncomfortable in those calls. And I just said, well, I'm just going to stop doing that because it's not worth it. And I think what I need to do is pick it up again and try to get them to think of some of these things. I'm going to do that. So thanks to you for that, Jennifer. I appreciate that.
Good. I'm glad you'll do that. We have to get back to civility.
Yes, we do.
We've lost it, right? We've lost the ability to really engage and have a meaningful conversation with people that we disagree with, right? And we saw that on full display at the presidential debates, right? The inability to take a moment and really listen to what somebody has to say. And we do it every day in our everyday lives, whether it's our neighbors or, as you said, grade school friend. I had this experience being in New Hampshire for 2 months. And it's a very different place and from what I'm experiencing here in the DMV. And so I think, trying to figure out a little bit of civility and a little bit of empathy.
It's important, and it is. I mean, it's sort of kind of extraordinary. I think that I am doing these calls with people that I've known since I was 5 years old. It's 60 years ago. It's a long time ago. So, but I'll keep plugging away with them and keep trying to.
Good.
So you mentioned the resources, the anti-racist resources you have. we Leadership Greater Washington actually stole a bunch of those to put on our resource page. We're using your information to help us quite a bit um, with that. So we've got a
Great.
screen up now of the resources and actions that people can take. We'll provide this to everybody after the session. But you've done a tremendous job there, Jennifer, in terms of the anti-racist thing. And seriously, we started talking about this, and we said, okay, who do we go to? And I was getting your weekly email, and I talked about the resources, and I said, well, here, let's use these to start. And it was a great kickoff for us. So thank you for that.
Oh, great. It's been wonderful to see the response that we've received from community. You mentioned the weekly newsletter. It's called In the Know. We have been doing that for a bit of time, and we pivoted pretty quickly to dedicate that weekly In the Know to Black Lives Matter and Black women. And so the newsletter previously had been articles and news stories that we at the Women's Foundation were reading and felt were important. And it has a very specific lens. Mercy Tigrar, our communications manager, curates that for us. And we've been very intentional about shifting on that newsletter and doing what we can to provide resources. So I think as a funder, there's the grant making, and there's the funding that we do in the community. And then there's also the platform that we have to really educate and share resources and push people to get a little uncomfortable with some of these issues. And so we've worked really hard on the anti-racism resources, and I'm glad that people can hopefully take advantage of some of those and really dig in a little bit more deeply.
They're very helpful, and we've actually built upon that, and we're now doing an anti-racist leadership series. We had almost 240 people sign up for it, so we're very, very pleased with that. That's been very successful. Great. It's getting great reviews from people. We will keep plugging away on that one. We do have a comment from Pinky Mayfield, who says we have to be willing to be uncomfortable to get comfortable with these issues. And that's what you just said, Jennifer. It's a good lesson for me. So Pinky, thank you for that. And I will get more uncomfortable as we go through this. We also have a question from Andrea Harrell, who says she went on the website and got it, but she's an African-American woman who's a founder and executive director of nonprofit Renaissance Group based in DC. What does the Stand Together Fund offer? So for those people listening who say, gee, can I apply to the Stand Together Fund? What does it offer? How can I take advantage of that?
Yeah, so the Stand Together Fund is our grant-making fund. We've done 2 rounds so far. The first round, as I mentioned earlier, supported organizations that were providing culturally specific support to survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence. The second round of funding we did supported direct cash assistance to frontline care workers, and we did that by funding a number of nonprofits that work directly with child care providers, family, in-home family, daycare, home health aides, et cetera, to provide direct cash assistance. We are getting ready to do a third round of funding, which will focus really predominantly on advocacy and grassroots organizing, because one of the things that we recognize, not only in this moment of COVID, but when we're talking about structural racism and structural inequalities, there is the component that is direct service that is absolutely needed. And then there's also the advocacy that has to happen to really change the structural components that are in place that are disadvantaging women and girls of color. So we'll do an advocacy round in our next round. We have pivoted in terms of how we do our philanthropy. We're really engaging in trust-based philanthropic practices, which means we are really following the lead of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color leaders in our community. So staff are reaching out to organizations, having phone calls to understand what are their needs, what's happening. We have been, our staff has been filling out the proposal applications on behalf of organizations. So we're trying to eliminate, to the extent possible, any barrier that might be in place for an organization to apply for funding. And all of our grants have been, we've pivoted from project support to general operating support. We are currently also in the process of figuring out what a fourth round will look like, because we are small and nimble and really have our ear to the ground on what's happening in community, we will follow the lead of where there is the most need, and where we as a Women's Foundation, bringing a gender, racial, and economic justice lens to the work, can provide support to fill those gaps. So more to come on what a future round of funding will look like.
And can we talk a little bit about your organization, your workplace? So everybody's at home. Are you planning on coming back to work, or how has this changed how you're adapting your organization for the future?
Yeah, so everybody is remote right now. We have office space downtown. We actually only have a year left on our lease, so we are not looking to renew. We will probably move to a permanently remote workplace, and then really, take advantage of our network and our partners who do have space for us to hold some meetings and convenings at a time when staff feel comfortable for coming back together. But at this moment in time, we will probably stay remote for a period of time.
Yeah, that's what we're looking at. We basically said not till there's a vaccine, not till mid-summer at the earliest will we come back. And when we can come back, we're not sure what that means and where we do. So
right, and I think until children can go to school or there is some sort of childcare, it is going to be very difficult for people to, return to work. I mean, even now, trying to figure out how to do that remotely. I mean, I feel so grateful that my girls are at an age where I'm not balancing that at home. But I remember what that was like when they were 2 and 3. And so, when we have a staff meeting, and I want to say all our children are on the call, because they are, right? Our staff have lives and they have children. And so how you balance that, and, we're not really having a really deep conversation about the toll that caregiving is taking on women. And that crosses socioeconomic status, right? And so I think until kids can be safely back in school, until childcare is fully open, it's hard to ask somebody to figure out how they're going to make that work.
Yeah, it's very difficult. If you say you got to come back to work, but there's no school, there's no childcare, it's almost impossible. So,
yeah.
One of the things that we are fortunate with, we just did our opening treat for the class of 2021, and the opening night party we normally do, we did that virtually. We did a dance party, and we invited families. So we had some spouses, we had lots of little kids jumping around. It's great to see, and we do that as well in terms of our staff meetings. We've got a little one in Jackson who joins us regularly for our daily staff calls, and it's great to see him. So I know what you're going through. So how any leadership lessons that you've learned over the past 6 months? Anything you want to share with us?
Oh, leadership lessons. I think the last 6 months have been a very humbling experience, probably for all of us. I think a couple of things come to mind for me. The first is, as I mentioned kind of at the beginning, is, providing yourself some grace and space, right? That this is an unprecedented moment in time, and the kinds of challenges that we are all facing as leaders are challenges that we have not yet seen in our lifetimes. And so I think when you're in a position of leadership, we're our harshest critics. And, I think giving ourselves a little bit of space and grace to say, I don't have it. I don't have all the answers. I'm not 100% sure what the right path is, I think is incredibly important. I think the other thing that really has hit home for me is surrounding yourself with a network, right? Surrounding yourself with people who are going to support you, who you can have those confidential conversations with. Being in a position of leadership, being an executive director, president, and CEO is a very lonely place. And There are lots of times where there are things that you can't share with staff, and there are things you can't share with your board. And so having a space and having people that you trust, that you can rely on, that you can kind of let your hair down and say, this is what I'm facing today, and that they can support you, and but at the same time give you very candid feedback and maybe push you and challenge you in some ways. And so I think finding your people and having that network around you is just incredibly important during this time.
That goes back to where we started this conversation about the community of people that supported you in the past few months, and how valuable that has been to you. So who makes up your network that you can go to? The Leadership Greater Washington Mind Trusts are a great way to do that. We're now starting cross-class mind trusts, so we're getting more people involved in that. I always said that's like cool. A kitchen cabinet that when I was in Montgomery County, I never had that. I never had that group of people who you could rely on to tell you the truth, not because they weren't changing it because they wanted something from you or whatever. They were just friends looking out for your best interests.
Yeah. I had, oh my gosh, there are so many people, Doug. I feel like
I hope Greater Washington's part of that.
I will do a disservice because I'm going to forget a name. And if you're on here, I'm so sorry. But I got to give a shout out to Kira Jarrett, who is just a dear friend who showed up on my porch with wine. We've known each other almost, I don't know, Kira, I want to say 20, 25 years, a long time before I was married. And she just happens to be LGW class of 2015, enough said classmate. So many, Beth Johnson, Rachel Kronowitz, Pinky Mayfield, who's on. Pinky is my board chair. The list goes on, but just so many people who have reached out, and whether it's been a text or a video chat or sitting on my front porch having wine, it's just been an incredible network of people. And I recently, Doug, I interviewed Jacqueline Lindsay, who is the interim executive director at the DC Fiscal Policy Institute, one of our grantees. And she and I were talking, and I was really kind of probing her a bit about what is it like to be an interim CEO in this moment in time. And, she talked about LGW and her network and feeling so deeply connected to the region as a result. And so, I feel that as well. It's just so many people have reached out and been supportive. So thank you.
Isn't it great to have that? It really, and it is very lonely when you're in a leadership position. It can be very lonely. And I have said many times during the sniper shootings, other things, I didn't have that group of people that I could just turn to and bounce ideas off of and get advice from. And it just made it that much more difficult. Anyway, we have a question from Deborah Filomeo, where she said, the Post this morning reported on the disproportionate impact of the COVID recession on minority workers, especially women, Black women, and mothers. Can you talk a bit more about the employment impact that you're seeing here in the region?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot. Institute for Women's Policy Research has done a tremendous amount of research looking at the economic impact of women, and particularly women of color, in terms of the recession and job loss. And I think we're going to see continued impact here across our region. So. Women of color were already really predominantly overrepresented in low-wage jobs. And those are also some of the first jobs that we see falling by the wayside, right? It's the service sector, it's hospitality. We are seeing those hits now, and I think we will continue to see them coming. There's a lot of discussion around the she session, as they are calling it, because this moment is really impacting women in a way that it has not historically, and I think it is a result of the jobs that many have been unfortunately pushed into, and those are the first jobs that we're seeing going. So the impact, I think, is going to be great. I think we will continue to see it, particularly as we move into the winter months. I know you've had others on talk about the hospitality industry, the service industry, restaurants, right? I think we're going to see some continued losses as we move into the winter months, and really have to think together as a region, because this region is so mobile, right? The DC, Maryland, and Virginia, it's people are moving across borders, jobs move across borders, population is very mobile, and so we're really going to have to come together as a region to understand how we support workers who are losing their jobs, and in particular the women and girls of color who are suffering.
We're going to have Gina Schaefer, who owns several Ace Hardware stores in the region, and a Frontline Conversation coming up fairly soon. So it's interesting to hear the impact on small business and what her forecasts are for the future. Jennifer,
Yeah, absolutely.
Give us some good news. What good news you got to share?
Some good news. So I will say I am heartened by the way in which the philanthropic sector has responded. I think we have pulled together in an extraordinary way. Tonya has done just a phenomenal job at the Community Foundation of really pulling philanthropy together. There's collective resources through the emergency fund there, but then we're also meeting on a regular basis. It was weekly at the very beginning of the emergency, and then now it's bi-weekly. And those calls are about really educating one another of what's happening, but also being clear who's doing what when. So sort of understanding that we all can't do everything. So, Women's Foundation, you are an expert in childcare, so take the lead on that and tell us, what we should be doing in that space. And so I think philanthropy is getting better at partnering with one another. I think philanthropy is also around the edges, making some changes in sort of how we behave in terms of, trying to eliminate some of the barriers to folks applying, removing reporting requirements, doing more general operating support, streamlining proposals. I think there's a lot more that the sector can do. And I'm hopeful that many of our colleagues can sort of push themselves to move into more of the trust-based philanthropic practices. So I do see some good news there. And then I also think it's a bit of a double-edged sword, but the innovation and creativity that we're seeing, I think there's good news coming out of that. I think our workplaces will fundamentally change, and I think there are some places where it's going to change for the better, right? I think that some folks are being incredibly creative and innovative, and while we never want people to try to do more with less, I think the innovation and creativity that is coming is really going to help move the ball and sort of push the nonprofit sector and the philanthropic sector in a way that maybe they would not have been previously. And then I think for me, the other good news is around, I want to say, the racial awakening that we're having in this country, right? I am hopeful that people, that this won't be just a moment in time, right? That people will really begin to dig deep and understand, and we can make some fundamental structural changes around racial injustice. And so I have some hope and some good news there, I think.
Well, I wholeheartely agree with you on the innovation piece. It's exciting, actually, to see the innovation that's happening today and how quickly it's coming. People are adapting on the fly. It's really, I know we've done that at Leadership Greater Washington. We've really turned around what we've been doing and the services we provide to our members and the value add we provide. So it's an exciting time to be through that. I'm very sorry that it's because of COVID and the recession, but there is a lot of innovation coming. So that's, I agree with you. That's going to be a lot of good news. I have a shout out I want to read to you from your chair, Pinky Mayfield. The team at WAWF are rock stars, and Jennifer is a stellar leader. She gets it and works tirelessly to ensure others get it too. Our region is better for the work at WAWF. And I agree with that.
Gratitude, Pinky.
How can we help you? Are there things we can do to help you?
Yeah, so I think we have a slide that has some resources on it. So we have our Stand Together Fund. You can go to our website and read more about the Stand Together Fund and what that looks like. I would say to people, continue to give, continue to dig deep. Um, I know people are feeling tapped out. I know, fatigue is setting in terms of the ask that you're probably receiving from organizations. But I really strongly encourage people to, on an individual level, continue to see how and where you can give. Think about a year-long giving program, right? From your personal contributions. Oftentimes, particularly now as we're heading into the end of the year, there'll be Giving Tuesday, there'll be end of year giving, and that is all incredibly important. But also think about giving in February and August, times of the year where cash flow can be short for organizations sometimes, and it's incredibly important to think about giving year round. We've included a link to donate to our Stand Together Fund. It is a pooled collective of individuals, corporations, and foundations who are all supporting work directly for women and girls of color in our community. I would say to our corporate partners that if you have the ability to influence, how and where corporate social responsibility or those philanthropic dollars go, please think of the Women's Foundation as a partner. If you are interested in doing work in the gender and racial justice space, you don't necessarily have to figure out internally how and where to do that. Think of the Women's Foundation as a partner to help you facilitate those kinds of investments. We've shared the link for the anti-racism resources. I encourage people to please take a look. If you have any additions, I've included Mercy's contact information on the slide because she is really managing that piece. So I encourage people to take a look. If you've got some additions for us, please reach out. And then lastly, we've also put together a list of organizational needs across the region. So these are either supplies that organizations need in this moment in time. Some of it is just highlighting services that organizations provide. We're working to update that. If anyone on the call or within the LGW network has an update that they'd like to provide, we're really trying to push that information out as best we can. So I encourage people to take a look at that. And if you have an addition, please let us know.
So ladies and gentlemen, now you know why Jennifer Lockwood-Shabat is one of my favorite people in the world. Jennifer, thank you so much for this conversation. Very enlightening, very timely, and it's always great to talk with you. I do want to thank PNC Bank for sponsoring these Frontline Conversations. Thank you very much to the whole team at PNC. And today at 3 o'clock, Tony Wellens from the Community Foundation and I are hosting a Voices DMV on the Table conversation. Talk about issues that are facing the region and potential ideas and how to address them. So if you're an LGW member, please come back at 3 o'clock and join that conversation with Tony as well. Jennifer, I'll give you the final word.
Well, actually, I want to put in one other plug before my final word. So we launched a new series called Ask Her, and it is a webinar series. So some of them are webinars, some of them are interviews that are posted on our blog, but it's really a way to highlight women leaders, both in our community here regionally as well as nationally. And so we've done a series of these. The first one was Teresa Younger from the Miss Foundation for Women. Claudia Williams on our staff did one interviewing Ai-jen Po from the National Domestic Workers Alliance and Fatima Goss-Graves from National Women's Law Center. We've done a series of interviews with some of our grantee partners, Indira Hennard from the DC Rape Crisis Center, which I see she's going to be class of 2021. I'm very excited. Dr. Dean at Bright Beginnings. And then this afternoon at 1 o'clock, Mercy is going to facilitate a conversation with Opal Tometi, who is one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter. So we'll be talking about activism, we'll be talking about how to protect Black women, we'll be talking about the role of philanthropy in that. So I encourage people, if you're not on our listserv, to please go to our website and sign up and participate in any of the Ask Her webinar series that we're doing, because I think it's a great way to educate yourselves and just learn a little bit more about what's happening in our community. So that will be my plug. And
So
then
we've got a whole series of Zoom conversations for you all to tune
yes,
into today. Before you give your final word, let's see your shirt. I love the little slogan on your shirt.
Oh, my shirt is "Get in Good Trouble."
There you go.
So it's John Lewis.
John Lewis.
My new uniform is I have a protest shirt that I wear every day with a jacket over it. So today I'm channeling. As I lose my earbud, today I'm channeling the Honorable John Lewis with "Get in Good Trouble."
All right, Jennifer, final word.
Final word, just thank you. Thank you for providing this opportunity for me to talk to the LGW community, and for those of you on here who I love and adore, just thank you so much for all the support and deep gratitude for the work that everybody is doing in our community to make it a better place. So thank you.
Jennifer, thank you so much. I miss seeing you. So we'll
I
get
miss you
together
too,
when we
Doug.
can. I might show up on your front porch with a wine bottle.
Anytime, anytime.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Enjoy the day. Tune back at 1 o'clock to the Ask Her series. Is that the right time?
1 o'clock, you have to go to our website to register, but at 1 o'clock, yes, we'll be having a conversation.
For the Voices DMV on the table conversation with myself and Tony Wellens, and a bunch of small breakout groups as part of that. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Jennifer, thank you so much. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you, Doug.
Bye, everybody.